You can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine. Sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time. Cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man. Spreading news and joy across the land. Diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're all keen. Ooh yeah. Ooh yeah.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show and giving it a listen. I'm your host, Don Kleppen. And if it's your first time here, welcome. Thank you for checking it out. This is a show where we're trying to take a more journalistic look at legal cannabis around the U.S. I'm a broadcaster by trade. I live in Chicago. I've worked in the city for about 15 years in radio now, and I've been a personal cannabis user of about 20 years. We're getting close to that point, as uncomfortable as it makes me to say. That's a lot of time to be using cannabis, doing anything really, 20 years. And it's all gone by in a flash. But as I was moving through my broadcasting career, I do news on the radio still, and I've done writing for different publications, and I do voice acting. I do a lot of different stuff on the microphone here. But when cannabis was legalized recreationally in Illinois, back in 2020, and even before then, when it went recreational in Colorado and Washington State in 2014. And obviously, there have been medical programs in existence around the country and the world for a lot longer than that. The point is, when it went recreationally legal here where I live, in Illinois, I was really excited to bring informative conversations to people where I live who maybe never gave cannabis a try, but could benefit possibly from some of the quality of life improvements that the plant can offer people. So I was very excited at the prospect of bringing those conversations to the platforms that I was used to addressing people on, like radio stations, like written publications. And I am still disappointed to this day at the lack of widely accessible conversations that do bring people some information about the plant, some perspective, some neutral coverage about what we're finding out about it. There's more research being done all the time, even though it's still Schedule 1, even though it is still federally prohibited in the States and in many countries around the world. We are, little by little, learning ever more about this cannabis plant. More and more people are using it and finding out about its benefits. And so when the legacy media channels that I was used to working on failed to bring those conversations to people because it's still not federally legal enough for them to touch it, I decided to start this show on my own. That was 3 years ago in 2022. Now we sit here in March of 2025. And in that time, this show has reached listeners in 87 countries, over 1,600 cities around the world, all 50 states. And what that says to me is that there are people around the world hungry for this kind of information. And what do I mean when I'm talking about this kind of information? It is the topics which I cover here on the Cannabis Man podcast. Not only am I bringing you news headlines, perspective from somebody who's used this plant from long before it was legalized and now does so in a legal and medical capacity, but I'll also speak with experts in the space, whether those be doctors or scientists who are medically prescribing cannabis and what they're seeing with their patients, or researchers who are going into the lab and actually diving into this plant, telling us what they're finding out about it. I'll also talk with politicians, people who have been elected or appointed to establish and then enforce laws regarding cannabis in these newly legal spaces. I'll also chat with entrepreneurs or business owners, people who have started a product or a service or a company in this space, talking a lot about the kinds of laws and regulations that they need to navigate as they're working in this space. And I, of course, will discuss this topic with other journalists or other podcasters or anybody else who is covering this. PR people, marketers, anyone else in the space who's kind of having conversations like this one about how to cover this plant, how much do we dwell on the propaganda from last century, as many of my guests have said, the brainwashing that still results in the stigma that we are facing today. All of that is a big part of why I started this show. And as I said, I'm just very grateful that it has grown the way that it has. And I'm grateful to be a part of it because for my money, there is no space as exciting right now as the legal cannabis space. Even though 2024 was a bit of a rough year, and I talk about that with my guest today. This is somebody who has been in the space since before it was recreationally legal anywhere, and he witnessed the first rec state go live in Colorado. They had a medical program up and running already, which he was involved with. So he saw things from that early medical standpoint and then watched as the voters enacted legal cannabis and was there on day one to pick up his license and grow his medical practice into a recreational one. So we talk about a lot of things that have changed in the last decade plus, from just medical cannabis to recreational, and then now we're over a decade into states having rec cannabis markets. Lots of change and some great perspective from my guest today. That would be Tim Cullen, CEO of Colorado Harvest Company. It's also been a little bit of a gap, I know, since I have been here. It's been a couple of weeks since I put out a new episode, so I apologize if you've been waiting for one. It has been extremely busy on my front, not just in the cannabis space. I've been doing a lot of other things, which I will tell you about after the show opens properly here. There are several news stories that I want to get to your attention, as well as some events that have passed and some other ones coming up that I want to talk to you about. In general, it's been a very newsy time here in the U.S. Wherever you are in the world, it's likely that you've seen some headlines that have been made by the new administration, the president and his administration in the White House right now, relating to cannabis, but obviously plenty of other things too. That has really occupied a lot of people's time and attention, understandably so. But there is something relatively positive on the cannabis front anyway that has come out of the current White House that I am really looking forward to discussing with you here. There was also a new research survey that showed something kind of surprising, to me anyway, about cannabis users in Canada. I'll be interested to hear if you found it surprising as well. We're also going to look ahead to the global cannabis market this year in 2025, and there is another state that the House of their representatives in the state passed a cannabis legalization bill. I'm going to tell you about which state is going to join the party that we're all enjoying here in the Green Frontier. All of that coming up shortly. For now, if you haven't already, please leave a rating or a review for this show. However you're listening to this, if it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you are hearing my voice from, on that platform, there's a way that you can review the show or leave some kind of rating, however many stars you think this content is worth. That really helps me and this show stand out from the millions of other podcasts out there. A lot of websites and publications estimate that the amount of podcasts around the world is somewhere around 5.5 million. Plenty of people speculate it's higher than that. So I'm very, very grateful that this podcast has been recognized in the top 10% of that around the globe, and reviews and ratings from listeners like you help me stand out from the crowd. So I appreciate that. You can follow the show at C-Man Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, or the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channels. You can also check out my voiceover work at my website, donkleppin.com, Kleppin. And you can become a patron of the show on Patreon. If you click the support the show link in the description notes, you can sign up and you will get episodes early every week, and I've got an update about publications in the future a little bit later on in the show. So lots to get to, lots to discuss, lots to share with you, so let's crack it open. This episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast starts right now.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis Broadcast.
And here we are. are. Now the show is open properly with the classic theme having been kicked off there. And I want to thank you for listening to the show again. And I want to thank you if you were listening before and you made it through the gap of a couple of weeks between my last new episode and this one. Thank you so much for waiting. I know I didn't put out an announcement or anything like that. I didn't let people know that there was going to be a break. I didn't really expect one. But there have been a lot of things that happened these last couple of weeks, and I'll try to parse them right now. The first one was a wonderful cannabis event. This happened about 2 weeks ago from today. I'm recording this March 6th of 2025. On February 20th, there was a cannabis launch event that I can talk about now that it's happened. This is a company that's been around for a while, but operating under a different name. Well, they rebranded to Emerald Gardens. Lovely name, I thought anyway. You may not have heard of them, but I'm sure you've heard of some of the products or the brand names that operate under that umbrella, those being Corner Boys with a K. They're also Tickled Pink, which is kind of a women-focused cannabis brand. They also brought to market Bluminati, which is some edibles there, and a fourth brand which launched here, had to go to California because of licensing stuff. Now they're back here, and they're doing some great stuff. That would be Cronja, Cronja. All of those four brands are now under the Emerald Gardens banner. And Emerald Gardens had a launch party at Roots Handmade Pizza in the South Loop, Printers Row. Love Roots, really good food there, good drinks, of course, too. And this launch party was just awesome. It was on the indoor rooftop. It was a really cold February night in Chicago. If you were here on the 20th, you'll remember what I'm talking about. It was frigid. So we were indoors on kind of a rooftop. They had a DJ going, DJ Boom. Shout out to him. He did a great job. The bar was fantastic. They were slinging drinks all night for everybody. All together, just a great vibe. And those four brands that I just mentioned, they were all set up with representatives there, tables, free product was flowing. They had a station where they were doing live rosin pressing. They were taking cannabis, pressing it into rosin, and then, get this, there was a station where you could go with your pre-roll. You could roll a joint right there, and then there was a lady with gloves on who would paint rosin up and down the outside of your pre-roll, and then roll it in kief or other cannabinoids like CBD, CBG, or CBN. I, of course, availed myself of a couple of those. The Tickled Pink table had a ice cream fountain. They had some strawberries there and just this delicious-looking fountain, which was spewing ice cream all night. Great tunes, great vibes, and just a really, really excellent atmosphere, which the Emerald Gardens sort of grew from a seed, if you want to keep that analogy going there. That was the very beginning of the name of this company, and I think they're going to be doing great stuff in the state for a long, long time. I'm going to talk about some of their products, which I've been trying since that event a little bit later on. When I was there, I was kind of acting as an MC. I was able to kind of make some announcements and move different segments along in the night. I was able to introduce Tim Campbell, who's kind of their head farmer there. He also introduced their head of extraction. Both guys very experienced in the cannabis space, coming from Michigan. Kim Briza, the owner, was there too. She's wonderful, and just I think their attitude and their perspective on the products that they're making as well as how they're running this business, they're going to serve Emerald Gardens very well for a long while. But I was very grateful and happy to be the MC for them at the launch party, and I look forward to more events like that in the near future. Something else I'm looking forward to doing more of. You may know I've talked a little about it on the show, not much. This is a cannabis podcast, and I try and kind of stick to that, but I do a lot of voiceover work. I have for a couple of years now. As a broadcaster, I was sponsored into the SAG-AFTRA union, which is the Screen Actors Guild, which back in the early 2010s, it merged with AFTRA, which is a union of broadcasters. And the point is that doing voiceover work alongside radio as a union member has allowed me to get things like an agent, has allowed me to submit for some major, campaigns, commercials, whether ad campaigns or big cartoons, animations, video games, narration stuff, the whole thing. And so none of this is really necessary for you to know. The reason I'm bringing this up, though, is because the last couple of weeks, I have been booked for several voiceover campaigns. I can't tell you specifically about the companies just yet. Once the spots are airing, then I can kind of come out and give you a little more details about, what I did and everything. But the point is, I have been in this booth where I'm recording this podcast from, but I've just been doing a lot of union voiceover work the last couple of weeks, and I'm very excited for these commercials to start airing because I think they're great campaigns. I really had a great time doing them. And also because I look forward to kind of sharing with you the audio of those commercials, and you can kind of get an idea of what working in voiceover is really like. So that's been taking up a lot of my time, as well as something related to that. It is a bit different, but also kind of creative. I've been spending some time on set around Chicago for different productions. They do a lot of filming work around the city of Chicago. Some big movies you may have seen over the years, like Dark Knight or Glengarry Glen Ross, depending on how old you are. Plenty of movies get shot around the city of Chicago, but also do a lot of shows and commercials and other things. I was on set last week for a very popular show centered around Chicago, and specifically its food industry. And that's all I'm going to give you for now. Just like the voiceover ads, I'm not allowed to say specifically which show was shooting here. But once the episodes that I was in air, I will be able to give you more details about that. But suffice it to say, between spending time with Gretchen and Violet, Gretchen has been doing a lot of work on her end too, building up a company, and I'm very proud of the work that she's been doing. But also, alongside me doing this cannabis podcast, the voiceover career, I've gotten more work in the last month than I ever have. And spending time as an extra, just a background guy on set during some of these shows and shoots around the city, it does take up a lot of time. And with Violet here, she's 10 months old already, soon to be 11 months. My God, how crazy it is that we're already almost at her first birthday. I can hardly believe it. But I wanted to kind of tell you as much as I can, and believe me, I will share more details as soon as I'm able to. But I wanted to tell you as much as I can about these projects which have kind of taken me away from new episodes of the Cannabis Man podcast. But now that I'm doing these things a little more and I've had this experience under my belt, I do have a better idea of how to kind of walk forward, accomplishing both these things at the same time. Walking and chewing gum at the same time, as one of my former teachers like to say a lot. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a glimpse into to my existence, my life here the last couple of weeks, and I hope yours has been going very well. I know it's a stressful time for a lot of people around here, and I say that because of some of that news that I alluded to coming out of Washington, D.C. I know it's got people kind of on edge of late. And a great thing to do in that environment, as I always say, is ingest some cannabis. Go ahead and, burn a joint outside, or smoke a vape inside, or pop an edible, drink a beverage. However you prefer to ingest cannabis, nothing like dealing with life's stresses than with a magical plant, which can kind of help you deal with a lot of those things, as well as many, many other of life's burdens that we all just kind of have to deal with as part of the human condition here. And speaking of ingesting some of that cannabis, let me tell you about some of these products that I have been trying as my product of the week. I am swamped with cannabis products. I've got a lot of new ones to tell you about, so I'm going to be packing these episodes over the next month or so with new products that I think you should definitely try. The first one I want to tell you about is one of these that I got at that Emerald Gardens launch party. This is a disposable vape from Corner Boys. Corner Boys has a K at the front of it, not a C. And you're probably familiar with their brand. They've got flower, they've got pre-rolls, they've got a lot of good products, and they have been around the Illinois marketplace for the last couple of years. And I know that their brand has become popular, so you've likely seen some of their products out there. I want to talk about this disposable vape. And the first thing I want to say with it is that its design is unlike anything I have ever seen, and I love it. If you have ingested any kind of cannabis vape products over the last few years, you've likely had a similar experience. Most people have some kind of pen. Maybe it's a box, maybe a kind of long rectangle, but most of the vape carts are put into a device for you to heat up and then inhale the vape from, and that device pretty much looks very similar across the board. When I opened the package of this Corner Boys disposable vape, I was not at all expecting something that looks like this. I am sharing a picture of this on the show social media channels. I want you to get a look at it for yourself. So if you can right now, head to C-Man Podcast on X or Instagram, check out the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page, or me on Blue Sky or LinkedIn. You can find me there. But I'm sharing an image of this thing because you need to see it. It looks like a comm badge from Star Trek, if you're familiar at all with that. But basically, it is a small black oval of a kind. It's very thin, it's very light, but when you have this in your pocket, when you're inhaling this, there is no way that anybody knows what it is, especially if they don't see you use it. If they just see it come out of your pocket or you empty your pocket onto a table or something, it looks like a car key fob. One of those kind of electronic things that you'd use to bump up against your door to unlock them, or have it on your person and just press the start the ignition button that most new cars have now. This looks like a fob that accomplishes something like that. Maybe it'd be your house key fob or something, but that's the closest thing that I think of whenever I'm looking at this thing. I absolutely love this. There's a couple of different reasons. One is that it's super light, and no matter which position it's in your pocket, it doesn't seem to impact the inhale on the vape. You know, if you're a big vape user, that if you let your pen fall onto its side, or worse yet, upside down somewhere in your pocket or in your bag or something, what happens is the concentrate that's in that cart will reorganize itself and will sometimes coalesce around the gap that you're meant to inhale from. And anybody who's had that experience is familiar with it, where you basically try and pull from your vape, and it's like you're trying to slurp through a straw that something ran up into and is now completely preventing any movement through. It's like a blocked straw. That's kind of what it can be like when you're pulling from a vape that the concentrate has jumbled around into. That never happens with this Corner Boys vape. I've had it on its side. I've had it upside down in my pocket. That is never the issue. The other thing is that the inhalation gap, the place that you're supposed to kind of put your lips onto and take in the vape through. Many pens, it's such a small, tiny hole. Therefore, it's easier to block by that concentrate. This is kind of like a smile along the edge of this key fob vape from Corner Boys. It is a long, slender gap that you can pull the vape through. And I'm not sure about this. I'll have to ask them when I speak to somebody from Emerald Gardens in a few weeks. But I'm going to ask them if that was part of the thinking in this design. Because maybe with this long gap, that's why it never gets clogged the way some other vape pens do. The flavor of this is very subtle, but it's also pleasant. There's no real aftertaste. It's not one of those vape carts where you get a strong taste of the infusion. You know, sometimes when you inhale vape carts, sometimes it's metallic. Sometimes it gives you that old school edibles kind of thing where you can taste the weed on the back of your tongue after you've swallowed the thing. Some vape carts I feel like are like that too. This is not like that at all. This is very subtly sweet and barely noticeable, but you feel it in the lungs and then you exhale. It's not a cloud maker. It's not one of those. It's a lot more subtle than that too. But the other day I used this to kind of kick off the day with some coffee that I've actually got in front of me right now. I've been really enjoying combining cannabis and coffee again. I'm recording this now, talking to you in the early afternoon. It's about 2:30, so this is my last cup of coffee for the day. But I wanted to pair it with this vape cart from Corner Boys, because I did this over the weekend. Gretchen and I went to this place near my mom's up in Morton Grove, this restaurant called Cappy's off of Dempster. Great small business, great food, wonderful portions, and great service. The prices are just right, too. We go there and patronize it every time we can. But on the way out of there, after our meal, I had a delicious omelet, some feta, some broccoli, mushrooms, and onions in there. Really, really tasty stuff. But large portions, I was full. So I took a few pulls from this vape in my pocket, and it felt wonderful. I didn't need to ingest anything else for like 2 hours after that. I was just riding on a nice mellow high. The sunlight was out. It was a little cold, but it was a pretty decent day to be out. Post-breakfast with some coffee, pulling on this Corner Boys vape, I found that to be a great way to start the day. Sometimes, when you burn a joint to start the day or whatever, you really feel it strongly, and you're kind of like, wow, I'm a little more stoned than I wanted to be. That was not the case with this, and I really wasn't concerned about that. I feel like you could hit this several times, and you would never go over the top of where you want to be. Like you'd never get into that place of being too stoned. Don't quote me on that, okay? I'm sure that if you grab this and you just pull at it for a while, you might be able to find your way to that place that you don't want to be. But for me, this is easy to dose. The taste is nice and subtle. The feeling is just right, especially to start the day, combining it with coffee and everything. And as I said, the design of this, for me, is really unbeatable because I value discretion. I still do. Even though cannabis is out there and legal, and thank God that it is, I love that. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily want to be advertising what I'm doing at all times. And when you burn a joint, or you're smoking a bowl, or of course like a bong, or a blunt, or something like that, everybody knows what you're doing. They can see it, they can smell it. Pretty obvious. Unless you duck behind an alleyway or you hand it off to somebody and run the other direction or whatever, you're not really going to be able to keep people from knowing kind of what you're doing. And like I said, I don't mind a lot of the time when I'm with my friends, my family, like it doesn't really matter. But there are plenty of times that I might like to ingest and I don't necessarily want to advertise what I'm doing for whatever reason. I just feel like maybe not having to go through that whole thing. This vape from Corner Boys accomplishes that better than anything else that I have tried up to now. So, as I grab my cup of coffee with a little Irish creamer in there and some classic hazelnut calorie-free syrup, and I hold this Corner Boys well-designed vape in my hand, I want to say cheers to you. I hope 2025 is off to a good start for you. I hope if you're stressing about things that you don't let it get you down. Always plenty of things in life to stress or worry over. Try and focus on the good. And in my mind, one of the big good things we have going for us right now is the expansion of the green frontier and more people availing themselves of the wonderful cannabis plant. Cheers. It's kind of like an orange, subtle aftertaste. A little bit. Not like I just bit into one. But it's almost like there's a little bit of a citrusy note on the back end. Just wonderful. And another quick product I'll tell you about, because this one was also good, also under the Emerald Gardens brand. This is from Kranja, and this is a sample I got from that launch party. This is a pre-roll of their Illuminati. Illuminati. Great name. Obviously a tip of the cap to the Illuminati, but with the twist of their lemony flavor, a lemon twist, if you like. So this Kranja Illuminati pre-roll has a glass tip, and it's a 1.5 gram, so it was large, thick, with a glass tip. And I enjoyed it with my friend Greg. He was visiting over the weekend. I ripped this out of the package, wanted something that was THC friendly, but not too over the top. This is 21.9%, which is right in my sweet spot. I look for things that are 15 to 25. Much higher than that, I'm feeling a little panicky. I don't really want to be there. And I'm starting to pay a lot more attention to terpenes and the other cannabinoid profiles in there. This trend of people thinking that the THC percentage is the end-all, be-all for your experience, it's not. And if you've been listening to this show, you already know that. But if it's your first time, I just want to tell you that is not the metric that you should be using to measure which cannabis products you love the most. Don't go into a dispensary and just say, hey, bud tender, give me the highest THC percentage you got for the cheapest price. That's the equivalent, man, of just going into a bar and being like, hey, pour me 2 shots of Everclear and watch me get into a fight with the old lady in the corner. Like, people are just going to roll their eyes, and it's like, hey, what are you, 16? Like, let's move beyond this. Okay, I mean, hey, maybe sometimes you're into that, and I'm not poo-pooing that as a general rule. If you want to get, really, if you go into a dispensary in a different town and you're just like, hey, I'm looking for something that's going to put me onto another, stratosphere right now. And high THC is the thing that gets you there, then go for it. And people have higher tolerances than me too, so if that's kind of your thing, I'm not going to knock you for it. But I'm just telling you that there are better ways to track the kind of feeling that you're looking for. And some ways of doing that are paying attention to the terpenes, how much and which ones are in there, the products you really like, as well as the other cannabinoids and that entourage effect of talking about, hey, does this have THCA, THCV? Does this have CBN or CBG? That profile and the dance that those different substances kind of do together, eliciting what's known as the entourage effect, that's going to have a lot more say over how you feel at the end than just simply the percentage of THC. So anyway, though, this Illuminati, the glass tip on this pre-roll, I don't know if you've had those. If you have not tried a pre-roll with a glass tip, do yourself a favor and get one the next time you see one at a dispensary. Because what it does for the inhale, it is just so smooth. And it allows you a much better experience with the flavor. You can pay much more attention to the flavor of the cannabis than otherwise when you're just kind of pulling on a regular old joint filter, one of those cardboard pieces, or just the paper, if you don't even use those, and you're just kind of an old school, raw paper kind of a person. You will be so blown away by the glass tip. It is like a totally different experience. So Greg and I really enjoyed the Illuminati here. The taste was very clean. It wasn't super lemony. It's not like a, Pine Sol Mr. Clean kind of like supreme lemon taste here. It was actually a little bit more like cilantro. A little clean, almost like a, I don't know, not lemon soap, literally, but a little bit kind of like that, like you're biting into a lemon candle or something like that. It was clean. So that's the takeaway, is that it's clean and subtly lemony in there as well. But I really enjoyed how I felt afterward. It was a nice boost without being too over the top. It was the evening after a nice meal of tacos and margaritas. Shout out Flacco's on Granville, unaffiliated, but I love them. I go there as often as I can. And I would absolutely do this again. So the Kranja Illuminati pre-roll with the glass tip, as well as the well-designed, incredibly well-designed vape from Corner Boys. Two products that you should keep your eyes out for from Emerald Gardens. Now for a chat with my guest this week, Tim Cullen of Colorado Harvest Company. We talk about a lot of things like the 2012 election when voters legalized recreational cannabis there, Tim telling a story about picking up his license, and a media crew followed him to do it, which kicked off a huge firestorm for him. Great business to start out of the gate for them. He also talks about, his perspective from someone who was in the medical space well before it was recreationally legalized. He talks about what's changed over the years and how the rec market looks different today versus that first day back in 2014. So we talk about that. Tim also got his start as a high school biology teacher, which, as you may imagine, gives him a pretty unique perspective in terms of the biology behind the cannabis plant. And he talks about how he brings that perspective into his business operations. We talk about the stores that you can find their products at for Colorado Harvest Company in Denver and Aurora and the other spots in Colorado. We also talk about rescheduling, and we spoke in December, Tim and I did, and this was before the announcement of the 90-day halt in the administrative hearings. But our conversation about what rescheduling could mean for his business as well as others around the country still holds up just fine, because we know that debate is still playing out. And none of us know what's going to happen when the administrative hearing picks back up again. But it's nice to kind of consider what rescheduling could change about the current climate. And after that, stick around. There are a few news stories that I brought up at the beginning that I want to dive into and talk more about after this week's guest interview. Listener, welcome back. My guest today has a very interesting story to tell, and I can't wait to get into it because he has been in the legal cannabis space from the very beginning, from before the beginning, really, in terms of recreational cannabis. He opened one of the very first recreational cannabis dispensaries in Colorado back in 2014 when that first launched, and was already into it from a medical side since 2009. And so he has seen things evolve from the very start of it, business-wise, medically, moving into the recreational space, and then to where Colorado is now 10 years later. And so the perspective is very, very valuable here, and I can't wait to hear the story. This is the CEO of Colorado Harvest Company, Tim Cullen. Welcome, Tim. Thanks for joining the show today.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me on, Don. Thank you.
Let's talk about the very beginning there. You got into the medical side in 2009 and then were right there at the front of the line in 2014, which was just such an exciting day for everybody in the country. But let's talk about you and how you got into cannabis.
Sure. I mean, 2009, now that I reflect back on it, is 15 years ago. And those years have felt a lot like dog years, maybe 7 for every human year. So at least 110 years in the cannabis industry now, right?
Centenarian, yeah.
Holy moly, yeah. So 2009 was kind of a wild time here. People refer to it still as the Wild West of the cannabis industry back then. But legal cannabis in the medical sense passed in Colorado in the year 2000. So it's really been in Colorado for 25 years now, which is kind of hard to imagine. It just feels like part of the culture now.
Wow.
But in 2008, I saw the writing on the wall. There were some medical dispensaries that were starting to open in town, and I noticed that they were not being closed, and people were shopping at them, and I went in and checked a few of them out, and I was like, this is really an amazing thing going on here. The thing that was most amazing to me are most of the people that were in the stores were actually selling cannabis to the retail stores at the time. It wasn't a situation like it is now where a lot of these mature companies have big established grow facilities, so they were relying on home growers to bring their goods in. And so that's when I thought, hey, I could open up a grow and get some contracts with some of these folks and do this on a larger scale. So that was the beginning of Colorado Harvest Company. Prior to that, I was a high school biology teacher for 10 years. And so it was a pretty big shift for me to jump over into this. But wow. I had a strong biology background. I had too much confidence for where I was at that time, but that did allow me to quit my job and lease a warehouse and get started, which is the hardest part of any entrepreneuring adventure. Is the first few steps are just such a leap of faith. But I took that big leap with the support of my wife and the idea that if this doesn't work out, I can always go back to teaching high school, and there will be a job waiting for me if I need that. But right. 15 years later, I haven't had to go back to teaching, and I think I probably won't.
That's great. Seems like a good decision. Seems like you made the right call. And what do you remember about that? When recreational stores started opening in 2014, you'd been in since 2008, like you said. What kind of changed when the recreational stores started opening up and more got into the licensing space?
Well, so I was sitting on my couch in 2012 during the November election when the voters passed recreational cannabis, and we jumped up and hugged and had no idea what the future was going to hold for us, but we knew that was going to be a big thing. 2013 was a year of rulemaking, and towards the end of 2013, we had submitted all of our required licensing documents to both the state of Colorado and the city of Denver. And I got a call from the city of Denver, and they said, you can come down and pick up your license. And so I went down to the excise and licensing building, and I was waiting in line. You have to go through kind of airport-style security to get into that building. And I was waiting behind this film crew who I later learned was from CNN. Oh. And they were there to film people picking up the licenses. And I was like, well, I'm picking one up. And they said, can we follow you? And I said, sure. And so they came upstairs and they filmed me on CNN picking up my license and then came back to the store. From doing that one CNN experience right there just opened this like floodgate of media of all these people that wanted to talk about that. So the first few days leading up to it were just nonstop interviews in the store, radio, I just podcasts, just you name it. People just trying to get into the story. And so, but we also had so much work to do. Also, we weren't set up to deal with what was going to happen. So, Colorado Harvest Company was issued 2 of the first 12 licenses that the state of Colorado and the city of Denver issued for recreational sales. So, January 1st, 2014, it was snowing so hard. It was freezing cold out. People started queuing up to line up in front of the store at about 6 a.m., and we didn't open until 10 a.m.
Wow.
So we rolled out heaters out onto the sidewalk. We had to bring out some like theater-style ropes so that the line would maintain. And we had a line about 3 blocks long. I'm going to say about a quarter of a mile or so long, and a couple-hour wait to get into the store. And that persisted until March of that year. So that went on for months of these people. Now, obviously, today, more licenses have been issued. There's no crazy lines like that. But the thing I remember most about that day was there was a guy in line who was complaining about how slow the line had been going and how many hours he'd been standing in line. And the guy in front of him turned around and said, "I have been waiting in this line since 1967. I cannot wait to get into this store. And I don't care if we have to stand out here for a couple hours." That really put it in perspective for me that this is really a big deal for the cannabis industry, for the state of Colorado, and obviously for Colorado Harvest Company. But that was a really exciting, kind of stressful time. But those first few weeks of recreational sales are a little bit of a blur because it was just so much work. We would just be stocking constantly, trying to help as many. We're getting hundreds of people through the store a day. This is a little medical marijuana store prior to recreational sales. And so we just weren't physically set up with enough point of sales, with a building big enough to handle the volume. So it was just like all hands on deck and a lot of work at the beginning. Now it's all kind of smoothed out, and that water level has evened out a little bit, and there are lots of cannabis stores around town now. But we're still proud to be the first ones to have been out in front, and it was a very exciting time.
No, I love that. That's an amazing story. And as you said, the little boost from something as small as, CNN, huge media company, but them there, like a lot of others, covering that launch. I mean, that was a huge countrywide fascinating moment. And for you to just kind of be there and they followed you and then back to the store, I can totally see how that would have led to just a major, bull rush for you guys over the next few weeks. And that's the good fortune. You talked about kind of the risk of entrepreneurship, which I totally get, and you're right about that. But it's those little moments of fortune. It's those little pieces of good luck that really kind of lead you along to the next steps. And it's really cool that you enjoyed one of those. I do want to ask, you talk about what it was like then, and you mentioned kind of now. Obviously, your process is smoothed out. So is everybody else's who's been there. We are now it's 2025. As crazy as that still is to say, and we're now 10 years into this. So what have you noticed in terms of a difference? What is the vibe like now?
Things have changed a lot over the years. COVID was an enormous change for the cannabis industry. In Colorado, that meant the launch of delivery and also online pickup. And so those have been 2 ways that people can now get cannabis that didn't really exist before COVID. And also a period of time where people were stuck inside with their families for a long time. And whether they were all having a great time together or whether they were all trying to numb their feelings about each other, cannabis sales were through the roof.
Yeah.
We're never going to replicate what happened during COVID. Post-COVID now, we've sort of slid back to sales that reflect where we were prior to that big bump that we could never make happen again. So, but I think if you look around in the news these days, you'd see that Colorado is experiencing a downturn. Our sales are lower in Colorado than they have been, and no one has been able to maintain this just nonstop up and to the right trend of business growth. And I think it's a lot of different factors have come into that. And some of them are pretty obvious, like tourism is still a big deal in Colorado, but it's not as big of a deal as cannabis tourism as it was in 2014 because so many places have, more than half the country has legal cannabis now. I think the Farm Bill has had a dramatic effect on cannabis sales as well, and sort of without meaning to, the federal government essentially legalized all of these variations of THC from hemp that are being derived and turned into all sorts of different products that are being sold in states where cannabis is not legalized. However, there's this little loophole that has been formed. So I think that is also having an effect on it. And just everything is more expensive these days. So I think people's wallets are just a little bit tighter right now, and everything is people have to budget a little bit more. So maybe instead of shopping for cannabis twice a week, someone's shopping once a week, or instead of buying a really high-end product, they're just buying what they can afford right now. But like everything, things change, and this won't stay the same forever. And I expect that there are brighter days for the cannabis future in the near future. I'm positive. So, but it's a very different world now. Very different world than 2009. Very different than 2014. It feels like a more mature market. Places are settled in. There's not as much turnover. Larger companies have arrived in Colorado, and there's been some consolidation here. And it's not all these little mom and pop stores anymore. It's bigger players with better advertising and marketing budgets and larger grows. And so we've also had to step our game up too to make sure that we stay competitive with the new gang that's here to sell cannabis in Colorado.
I want to, talk about the, specifically the hemp versus cannabis sort of battle that's playing out right now. You did mention the Farm Bill. I talk about that a lot on the show. And here in Illinois, like some other states, there is a battle playing out right now over whether they're going to ban these hemp products or just regulate them. The governor and the mayor are kind of, at each other's throats about this. It's a very contentious issue. And you mentioned about how it sort of created this legal loophole. California, that governor, as far as I know, has looked to ban these hemp products. There was a floated bill last year with the last Congress in the House to, it never really got the full votes or anything, but there was talk about banning these hemp products. What's your opinion about that? Do you think that they should be regulated like the cannabis industry, or should they be banned outright?
Oh, that's a great question. And really in my heart, I'm pro-cannabis across the board. And I really feel like hemp is not a different plant. It's just the male version of the cannabis plant. And I really want to see cannabis accepted in society and across the country, almost regardless. However, as a licensed business owner who has to jump through all of these hoops to maintain this licensed business, it seems unfair that the federal government did not legalize the THC that's in my cannabis, but legalized all these variations of hemp-derived THC in states that are not regulated. It would be like if alcohol were legal in Colorado, but in Wyoming you could make bathtub gin and sell it, and the government just didn't care. And so
yeah.
If it's going to be a legal regulated business, then I think there's some responsibility by the governments that oversee that to protect these businesses from the knockoffs that are happening around it. So I want hemp to do fantastic. I want it to be a huge category for Colorado and for the country. I think it's a fantastic thing for farmers to be growing, and lots of products can be made out of it. Should it be being manipulated into forms of THC that are not naturally found? Probably not. It's a completely unregulated type of a thing that could continue to happen. If you are any good at chemistry, you can start attaching oxygens and hydrogens onto these molecules and say, well, this is a different thing than what you're talking about. And then I can add one more hydrogen and say, well, okay, it's still a different thing than what you're talking about. And that can go on forever. And it's just not a thing that I think consumers want. I think in places where people can get real THC from real cannabis plants, that's what they choose to buy. You don't see this hemp-derived THC products doing well in Colorado, but in places where cannabis is not legalized and that's the only choice people have, those products and those companies are able to thrive. It's wild to me that on my social media platform, I have Cheech and Chong advertising gummies to me, and that's a market I'm not allowed to touch. I can't send my products over state lines. I can't advertise on social media platforms. I can't put pricing on anything. I just want the playing field to be level, and it feels right now like it's not. And it's not in the weirdest way that the federal government tilted the playing field, which I never thought would happen in that direction, but that's where we are right now.
Yeah, well said. And let me just say, I totally agree with you. I've talked a lot on the show about the different hemp products, and God knows, there are responsible actors out there. I know people who have started hemp companies that are making products, and they take the safety of consumers very seriously. They're responsible people. But at the same time, as you pointed out, with the freedom that the federal government unintentionally gave to hemp product makers, there are certainly bad actors out there, and they are using the circumstances as they exist to very well succeed in states where it's not legal. And I also think that you're right that a lot of people do choose, when they have the option, to just go with the naturally growing THC in cannabis plants. Here in Illinois, we've got people driving from over the borders in Indiana, in Wisconsin, places nearby where they do have those hemp products, but they're coming into this state for the cannabis products. So I think that you're right about that, and I think the safety and regulation that you and other cannabis business owners have been subject to over the last decade, it's only fair to subject these business owners to the same thing, and the consumers want that as well. I'm sure of it. You also brought up some chemistry angles to this, and you mentioned that you were a high school biology teacher before jumping into this industry and all of that. Let me ask you, from a biologist standpoint, what is maybe, I don't want to say different about your approach at Colorado Harvest Company, although maybe there are some of those, but what is your sort of, what are some stances you have on a cannabis plant? There are people who are trying to kind of mess with the biology of them, whether these are hemp companies or not. But I guess what I'm trying to ask is your perspective different in some way when you're looking at cannabis products versus a lot of other business owners out there who don't have a biology background?
Sure. Well, I think that's one of the big changes that's happened in the industry since 2014. And if you looked back to 2014, and this carried over from the medical days, Colorado had a rule that was that basically put everything underneath one roof. So if you owned a retail space, you had to have a production facility to grow your products. And if you owned a production facility, you had to have a retail space. And this idea was called vertical integration. And it sounded great, and it sounds like this will be easier to regulate. Everything's under one roof. We'll be able to track these plants all the way through. That was true through 2014, but with recreational sales, the state of Colorado departed from that and said, now, if you want to be a standalone grow, you can. And if you want to be a standalone retail space, you can. And so it separated this vertical integration. So now people have specialized in Colorado. Most of the retail stores are essentially wholesale dealers who are buying products from grows all over the state of Colorado, and are not affiliated with those grows. And so there's this big wholesale market, but there are still some holdouts. And so Colorado Harvest Company is one of those holdouts. And that's one of the things I'm most proud about, is that we produce the vast majority of the flower that we sell or is produced in-house in our grows, trimmed by our trimmers, and sold inside of our retail stores. And we don't sell wholesale products. So if you want to buy Colorado Harvest Company cannabis, you have to come to a Colorado Harvest Company store. And so I feel like that is a unique selling point for our company. But in reality, like, as just a person who really likes plants, like, the cannabis plant is so unique. If you were an indigenous person walking around hunting and gathering and you ran across this plant, it is just so different from anything else that's around it. You would know immediately this is something that's special. Whether you figure out right away that it could be smoked, you would know that this is just a unique plant in the environment, based on the types of leaves that it has, the flowers that it has, the life cycle that it has, the way that it breeds. And so I'm very just appreciative of the actual plant itself. But as far as the biology that goes into that, we work a lot with our breeding program. We have a really aggressive breeding program, because that is what makes us unique, is having a lot of products that you just cannot get anywhere else. So we're constantly looking for what is the best and what is the newest, and how do we put those two things together so that our shelves are always fresh and always have the most unique and fantastic products that you can buy in the state of Colorado. In order to do that, there's a lot of biology that goes into that, but it's not a lot more complicated than the biology class you took in high school, where Gregor Mendel is using his paintbrush to brush pollen onto the pea plants. We're doing similar genetic crosses like that in our grows. We take the very best male pollen that we can get, and we cross it with the very strongest female plants that we can get, and we produce unique cannabis plants. And so having that background in biology just really allows me to be able to, at this point, communicate with the production managers who are really overseeing these products, and just being able to understand the process that they're performing that is turning out these products at the end, and being able to speak knowledgeably about the different fertilizers that we use and the pest control methods that we use, and even down to the soil mediums that we use, is all biology about how these plants grow. And at the end of the day, we're just trying to produce a really high quality, consistent product, which is much more difficult to do than you would think. It's really like an agricultural product that always needs to be fairly similar, and biology says every one of them is going to be unique and special, and you just have to account for that in your process of producing them.
You said a lot of great stuff there, Tim, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective, and as you mentioned, some of that biological expertise, which I can totally see the value of in terms of the products that you're putting on some shelves at the Colorado Harvest Company. Let's talk about where people can find some of those products and where those shelves are located. Where are you guys?
Sure. So we have two locations in Denver. Our one location is what's called the Green Mile, and the Green Mile is a unique area in Colorado because it was, if you remember back to 2009, not only did the cannabis industry start to explode in Colorado, but it happened because there was a recession that was happening, and there was unfortunately lots of small businesses not making it. And there are these strange banking rules that still exist, and back in 2009, the rule was there are no banks for you, and if the landlord has a building that they've taken out a mortgage on, they can't lease it to a cannabis company, or the bank would just call their note in or tell them to evict their new tenant. And so the areas in Denver where you see the higher concentrations of cannabis businesses are the areas of town where building owners owned their buildings, so more established parts of town, and had tenants who were leaving and were open to taking on these cannabis clients. And so the Green Mile is the stretch in Denver from a highway called I-25 down to a major cross street called Evans. And it's a stretch of South Broadway where there are 17 cannabis stores in this 1 mile stretch.
Wow.
And it is the highest concentration of legal cannabis businesses anywhere in the country. And the only reason it exists is because of those circumstances, because today the zoning rules say these cannabis companies have to be 1,000 feet from a school, a park, a daycare, a drug and alcohol treatment facility, or a like business. So it would never be allowed to happen again. The zoning wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
But it exists because it goes all the way back to the very beginning. And so we have one store located on the Green Mile. We have another store that's just a couple miles away that's off of another street called Calumet. But people love that one because it's not on the main drag, and you can sort of duck in and out of there, and you can be positive you're not going to bump into your neighbor. And then we have a third store that's in the sister city to Denver is called Aurora, and so it's right outside of Denver. And we're out in Aurora, but Aurora took a totally different approach. Denver let the cannabis businesses be regulated through these zoning rules. And they said, okay, eventually all of it filled up, and there's nowhere to put a cannabis store that meets those criteria of 1,000 feet from everything under the sun. But Aurora said, their city is divided up into 6 districts, and they said we're going to put 4 dispensaries in each district, and that's all we're going to have. So they have 24 stores in the entire city, whereas Denver has over 200 stores in the city. And so the pie is just sliced much thinner in Denver. And so there's just Aurora is a fun place to do business because it's just busy out there. There's just not as many stores, and people are really excited about cannabis there, and we just see a lot of business come through our Aurora store. So it's our biggest store, and so we put a lot of effort into that. If you check out our website, which is just www.coloradoharvestcompany.com, you can see pictures of this 1967 bus that we remodeled, and we used to have a glass blowing studio in there, but we had to change that during COVID, and it turned into an online pickup area. But that store accommodates 300 to 500 people a day through the doors, and it's just a busy, bustling retail store, and it's selling all the cannabis products that you could ever imagine, and people are just in love with it. And so that is a really exciting store to run. But it's also cool to be a part of the roots of the beginning of it down on the Green Mile as well.
Yeah, it sounds really cool, and I'm at that website right now, and I can see the picture you're talking about, Tim. This is really, really cool, and it's just a fun angle to just the whole cannabis space, which is a fun space to be in. But I could
go ahead. I have to tell you one quick story about the bus though, because it's actually a mistake. And when we first opened that store, we were just coming off of this whole 2014 recreational cannabis, lines of people at the door, and like, how do you get these people through the store faster? And so we switched over and we started pre-packaging all of our flour. And so when people would come into the store, we actually had touchscreen computer kiosks, and all the products were on there. And you could go through and like fill up your grocery cart, and then we'd need a couple minutes to do fulfillment. And so the bus was there to be a photo booth, so that after you placed your order, you could kill a couple minutes to the photo booth. You could wander over and check out the glass blower, and then they'd call your number and your product would be ready.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, people hated that. They hated it. They wanted the deli style. They want to see the flower. They want to talk to a bud tender. So what would happen, we got too good at it. People would walk in and they say, I'd like an eighth of sour diesel. And the bud tender would turn around and grab an eighth and go, here you go. And they go, oh, well, that wasn't really a cool experience at all. Like,
man, I wish we had that in Illinois, because we don't have that at all. Everything's behind some locked door, and we do ask the bud tender, and then they go far. They disappear somewhere for a while, and they come out with it. I think what you just described is something that I would totally love. I'd love to see that.
Oh, it's what all the people want. They want to talk to the bud tender. They want to see the flower. They want to smell it. They want to talk about it and hear, what's the latest, greatest. What are you guys smoking? What's coming in next week? Like,
yeah.
They want to see the colors and the, just all the sights of these big jars full of cannabis. So we dumped out all of our pre-packs. We put it all back in jars. We put the bud tenders back on the floor. We left the buses still in there, so you could still use it as a photo booth if you want. But we had this great idea, but that's some of the arrows that the pioneers take at the beginning. We just had to figure the system out, and what I thought was a great idea turned out to be a flop, and we just had to make some adjustments on the fly. So now we're back to deli style, but the bus is still there and beautiful, and we love it in the store, but it no longer serves the purpose that it had when we first got it in there.
That's kind of amazing, because it's a testament to, as you said, the pioneers. It's something you attempted. You found out it wasn't what the consumer was looking for, so you pivoted, but it's still there as a kind of reminder and as something that makes it stand out from any other dispensary you're likely to come across on the street. I'm sure none of the neighbor stores have any buses on their property. Yeah, so I think that's something that makes it stand out as something cool as well. And I think the approach that you've taken and that you continue to take at the Colorado Harvest Company is something that's going to benefit consumers for a long time. And God knows I could talk to you about this all day, Tim, but last question for you. The DEA is still going through their hearings about possibly rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 down to Schedule 3. Now, it may not make much of a difference in the states that have already legalized, and we talked a little about the vertical integration. It's the same here in Illinois, by the way. Everything has to be done within state lines and all of that. But rescheduling is something that could potentially change that. And the Cheech and Chong hemp operators that can go across state lines, that's something that rescheduling might actually be able to change. So I'm just curious, your perspective as a business owner on the potential of rescheduling down to Schedule 3 for cannabis. What would that do?
That's a great question. It's something I think about all the time, too. So I guess I'm going to answer it in two parts, if that's okay.
Go for it.
The first part would be, we have been dealing with cannabis for 15 years as a regulated retail business without any help from the federal government. And if it doesn't change, we will continue for another 15 years, just like we have been. Our doors will stay open, our customers will be happy, we'll make payroll, and the sun will continue to shine. So if nothing changes, the world does not stop turning. If it does change, though, it would open up, and again, back to leveling this playing field a little bit. I think consumers don't understand that these businesses still have no access to capital. We have bank accounts. There's a handful of credit unions that do most of the banking business in the state of Colorado, but they're not banks that you would have heard of. They're like little banks that only operate inside of Colorado.
Sure.
And so we do have checks to write vendors, and we do direct deposit for our staff on payday and things like that. So it's not back in those dark days of, a lot of cash in the safes. Our cash is out of the stores every night, and I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
But if I went to the bank and said, I'd like to open a new store, can I take out a loan for $300,000 to get this done? Or I'd like to acquire another business and I need a business loan to do that, they wouldn't loan me $25 to go buy lunch. I mean, there's no access to capital through these banks at all.
Right.
We're still not able to take credit cards, which to me is one of the most un-American aspects of this huge American experiment, is that people should be allowed to spend their money on what they want. It's their money, and the credit card companies regulate where people can swipe their cards. So we still are not allowed to take these credit cards. The insurance rates that we paid for our delivery service are above and beyond what any delivery company in the country is paying for these things. We just get hit over the head by costs that are astronomical at every turn. And Schedule 3 would change that. It would open up the banking industry. It would allow the insurance industry to insure us. It would allow banks to be able to feed us capital. It would allow these publicly traded companies to become funded again. It would allow, maybe products can travel over state lines. Maybe they can't. Maybe I could order my wholesale from Oregon and Washington, or even Chicago. I would love that. It would open this whole industry up to what it should be, which is a legal regulated industry that is sanctioned by the cities, the states, and hopefully soon enough the federal government will join this. So from a business owner standpoint, it would be a tremendous improvement in the ecosystem of the cannabis industry, like kind of the behind the scenes part that we work with, to have the federal government join us. It's been difficult but possible to run it without that. But man, I would like to see Schedule nothing, but if Schedule 3 is where we're going to land for now, then it's a big improvement over where we are today.
Totally agreed, man. Fingers crossed that they, get their heads out of, where they are and they make this happen, because it's overdue, long overdue, for all the reasons you just laid out and more. And it's just something that, it's the reality of today. It's what the American people want, and it is un-American to sort of cram these businesses into this regulated place where you're getting hit over the head with all these different costs that other ones don't have to face, and it's just ridiculous. So I do hope that we're not too far away from some news on that front. And as you said, the goal ultimately is Schedule 0, but if Schedule 3 is a step on the way, that's better than 1, and it's certainly progress. So here's to that, and here's to continued success for the Colorado Harvest Company, of which Tim Cullen is the CEO. Keep up the great work, Tim. I could talk to you all day. I hope to have you on again, and best of luck in the future.
Well, I'd love to be on again. I sure do appreciate it, and thanks for doing such a good job getting the message out to everyone. I appreciate that.
And there you have it, listener. One more time, thanking my guest, Tim Cullen of Colorado Harvest Company. Great to chat with him. Really fascinating stuff. Just perspective from the very beginning, talking about what he learned as an entrepreneur, thinking about the VW bus, thinking people would love that, and then realizing that's not what they wanted, but keeping it around as a kind of memento, as a museum exhibit, if you will, and also a reminder that that's the entrepreneur's journey right there. Mistakes are going to be made. You're going to learn things. You're going to have successes, and you're going to have some failures, but you just got to keep going. And Colorado Harvest Company is still going very strong, and good for them. And I'm looking forward to trying some of their products. I haven't had the pleasure yet, but I do look forward to trying some from them. If I've got to go out to Colorado to do it, I will do that. But there is another state, and this is moving into the news segment here, there's another state which the House of Representatives there passed cannabis legalization bill, and this was last month, February 20th. This came out. It's a Forbes article published by A.J. Harrington. I have linked it in the description notes below, which is something I always try to do. It is the New Hampshire House of Representatives that voted to pass a bill to legalize the personal possession and use of recreational marijuana, although the measure does not legalize sales of cannabis. Kind of a critical specification there. This is HB 75 from Republican Representative Kevin Verville. It was passed by a voice vote Thursday afternoon. And if passed, the bill would remove criminal penalties for possessing and using cannabis by adults age 21 and older. The bill would not create a regulated cannabis industry or legalize sales of recreational cannabis. Public consumption of cannabis would remain illegal, and cannabis would still be illegal for those under the age of 21. Now, I'm not going to go much further into this article. There's plenty more here, more context. It was originally reported by Marijuana Moment. If you've listened to the show at all, you know that I'm a big fan of their work. So the original article is linked in here as well. By all means, check it out for yourself. But the main takeaway is that New Hampshire's House passed a legalization bill, but with the key distinction of not allowing sales of recreational cannabis. So, if you're a medical patient, you have access to New Hampshire's cannabis dispensaries. If you're not, you can presumably get your cannabis elsewhere in a different state, and then this is allowing you to bring it back in to New Hampshire. Can't consume it publicly, and you won't be able to buy it recreationally within state limits, but if you have it, you can use it if you're over 21. So that's something to watch and look forward to. We'll be interested to see if New Hampshire moves that forward. Checking north of the border. I talk a lot about Canada on the show. I've interviewed business owners from there. I love sort of looking at their market because they got a head start on cannabis legalization federally. I mean, I say head start. The U.S. hasn't done that federally. We're still prohibited here on the federal level, whereas Canada has legalized. And every year since 2017, Health Canada has conducted its Canadian Cannabis Survey, in which the government agency poses various cannabis-related questions to members of Canadian society. I've linked this article below from Weed 9000. It's a blog, and you can follow along if you like, but the headline and the key takeaway is that only 3% of cannabis consumers obtain products in Canada from illegal sources. So they have somehow, at least according to the respondents to this poll by Health Canada, only 3% are getting cannabis from the black market. Now, to me, this is pretty remarkable because we're sitting here in 2025. They have been looking at this since 2017, and I can remember reading before the COVID pandemic and even shortly afterward in 21 that one of Canada's huge problems was a persistent black market. And that is something that states in the U.S. are dealing with right now. Lots of states are. Depending on what your dispensary count is like, how many people have licenses to sell, depending on what your price point is. States like Michigan, people are happy to go there, and you can get great deals compared to other states. Other places like Minnesota seem to have struck a nice balance, and it seems like people are not as interested in buying from the black market there. And in places like Michigan, like I said, nobody's buying black market because why would you? You can go down the block and have a regulated thing for cheaper than you're likely to find on the black market. But other states like California, like New York, their black markets have persisted. So I was really intrigued to read that small number of Canadians who say that they're getting theirs from illegal sources. Now, this data is also from 2024. They collected from April 4th to July 2nd of last year, and they surveyed 11,666 respondents starting at age 16 and older across all provinces and territories. So a little under 12,000 Canadians, 16 or older, taking this survey from Health Canada. And one of the main findings is that only 3% of consumers, quote, reported accessing cannabis through illegal sources, which is a decrease from a reported 16% back in 2019. Many consumers reported cultivating their own cannabis and or being gifted cannabis from friends and family. Boy, I'd love that. What a nice little trend and tradition that Canada has started here. I mean, I've got some great homemade stuff. My Uncle Ken makes beef jerky. He dehydrates the beef. He grows peppers and dehydrates those and grinds them up and sprinkles them on the beef jerky. It is a food gift I look forward to every single year. My godmother, my Aunt Dee, she makes fudge. Makes homemade fudge and like peppermint bark stuff, chocolates, those kinds of things. And God knows my wife Gretchen makes delicious food every single day. So I love the food gifts. I also love, artisanal stuff. If somebody is a woodworker and they were to gift me like, a knife handle or something wooden that was well designed, I would love that. Artisanal gifts are, something somebody spent time on and their expertise. That's really great. And I can't tell you, I've also been gifted cannabis over the years. That's certainly true. But if it was something I could look forward to around the holidays or all year round, every holiday, every month, all the time, that would be awesome. So well done, Canada. Really, really glad to hear that. You can go on and check out the other findings of that survey from Health Canada. They break down the different rates of products typically reportedly consumed last year and other things. But turning our attention globally, we're just talking about the different products in Canada there and what people are kind of consuming, which if you read the rest of the article, you could see. But there's an article here from the Mercury News published February 20th, so a couple weeks ago, by Matt Rozo of the Mercury News here. And he points out, which I think most people expect, the global cannabis market is poised for significant transformation this year in 2025 as more countries inch closer to legalizing cannabis for medical, recreational, or industrial purposes. The growing wave of legalization is driven by shifting public attitudes, economic incentives, and evolving international policies. And then he dives into closer looks. He looks at Europe first. Now, we talked on the show about Germany last year. That's the first one brought up. As they have from the beginning, Matt here talks about this could signal neighboring countries like France or the Czech Republic to accelerate their own legalization efforts. And I'll tell you, if the economic incentive is one of your top concerns, you better do it sooner rather than later, because as we know here in Illinois and most other states that are legal recreationally, who have neighbors who have not yet legalized it, those people cross state lines and they spend their money here. So if you're a country like Germany and you've got neighbors in France and Czech Republic that have not legalized, those citizens are for sure crossing German borders and getting their cannabis there. Matt moves on to Latin America's continued momentum. Colombia, which has already established itself as a global hub for medical cannabis exports, is exploring full legalization to stimulate its economy. The president, Gustavo Petro, has championed cannabis reform as a part of broader drug policy changes. Meanwhile, countries like Brazil and Argentina are debating expanding their medical cannabis programs. And Matt notes that Brazil has a massive population, so it would be a pretty lucrative market if it legalized recreationally. And Argentina is seeing growing momentum for recreational use. North America. The U.S., obviously a key player here. Federal legalization unlikely, as he mentions, in this year. But incremental changes like rescheduling could pave the way for a more unified market. I've talked about interstate commerce a lot on the show. If cannabis does get down to Schedule 3, you should check out some past episodes where I talked about that. States like Texas and Pennsylvania are also considering legalizing initiatives, potentially expanding the U.S. market significantly. And if you paid attention to my episodes in November, you know that Florida almost legalized recreationally. It was something like 54 or 56%. They got the vote to legalize, but they need 60 to amend the Constitution there. So those states, and then Canada, as we were just discussing, continues to refine its regulations with an emphasis on improving access and fostering innovation. Mexico, having legalized cannabis in principle, is expected to implement more robust frameworks to capitalize on its vast potential as a cannabis producer. Asia, slow to embrace cannabis legalization due to strict cultural and legal norms, but Thailand's groundbreaking legalization of medical cannabis and decriminalization in 2022, since which time they have flip-flopped a little bit, but still decriminalized there. This year, countries like South Korea and Japan may consider easing restrictions on medical cannabis, driven by increasing demand for alternative therapies and the success of Thailand's model. Then he moves on to look at Africa. Africa's cannabis market gradually gaining recognition, with countries like South Africa and Lesotho leading the charge. South Africa's push for recreational legalization could become a reality this year, further solidifying its position as a regional leader. Morocco, already a dominant player in the cannabis export market, is exploring ways to formalize and expand its industry. Now, Matt doesn't mention any specific numbers here. He goes on to say a couple other things with economic and social implications and draws his own conclusions, but I will say, I'm editorializing after that article. I have talked on the show about projections for the global cannabis market. There are projections that show it could hit $50 billion this year in 2025. There are projections that show higher numbers than that. Even though 2024 was a year of consolidation, for cannabis businesses especially, but plenty of companies consolidated. And they're still doing that. This economy at the beginning of 2025 is not off to a roaring start. Lots of companies deciding not to fill open positions. The February jobs numbers that they've shown so far, not good. Coming in way below expectations on job creation, unemployment numbers, all the stuff that you don't want to see. So I say that to just bring the caveat of, even though specific companies might be slowing down or looking to kind of chill, consolidate, whatever, the global cannabis market is still only projected to go one way. And that is that graph with the arrow going up and to the right. So even though specific states, specific companies, specific, sub-niches within the cannabis industry overall, even though some of those may dip, may go down a little bit, I've talked about problems that state markets have faced and all that, that's real. But the global industry at large is still growing a lot, and growing fast. And that trend is only expected to continue. And pulling it back into the U.S. for now, some of that good news I alluded to at the beginning of the episode is here in a Marijuana Moment article. I've linked this below as well. Always do. Always encourage you to subscribe to Marijuana Moment. They're a great journalistic effort in covering legal cannabis, so keep up the great work, Marijuana Moment. And the headline of this piece by Kyle Yeager, which was published yesterday, March 5th, Trump White House invites proposal on federal marijuana legalization, according to one activist. I'll read a little bit of the top here. I won't read the entire thing. I never do. I've linked it below again. You can check it out for yourself. But a longtime drug policy reform advocate says he spoke with a White House staffer at an event last week and was invited to submit a proposal outlining why President Donald Trump should back federal marijuana legalization. This was at Americans for Tax Reform's weekly Wednesday meeting of conservative activists hosted by Grover Norquist last week. Citizens Against Prohibition, COP, drug policy specialist Howard Wooldridge said a White House rep welcomed proposals from all attendees, and he was able to personally discuss his plan to advise the administration to adopt a pro-legalization position. Wooldridge's quote goes like this: "I got a couple minutes with her, just one-on-one, and basically gave her the basics that my organization of law enforcement and citizens would like to see an end to the drug war and make it a medical issue in the macro." End quote. Wooldridge told Marijuana Moment in a phone interview on Tuesday. He goes on, quote, "She was very open to any and all suggestions coming to that particular meeting because it obviously is a friendly environment for someone who's coming from the Trump White House," he said. "She was certainly a good listener." End quote. As far as the cannabis proposal is concerned, Wooldridge said he would be submitting it by the end of this week with consultation from well-known conservative cannabis lobbyist Don Murphy. So that's all I'm going to read of the article. Again, I've linked it below. There's a lot more great information here, background, perspective, and where this may go from here. But what I love to see, because this has certainly been debated since the inauguration on January 20th, we're about 6 weeks from that point. And in that time, there has certainly been a lot of bracing from different companies, basically holding still, waiting to see what's going to happen. And these tariffs that have come out, that has a lot of other industries, as well as cannabis, clutching even harder. So people are definitely waiting this out, and there was a lot of concern in the cannabis industry, especially when that DEA administrative rescheduling hearing got pushed back 90 days. But now that proposals are apparently being invited for federal legalization, whatever else, everyone's got their opinions, and I try as much as I can not to be a political podcast here. I have to talk about some of it because it relates to legal cannabis, but I try not to kind of go off on tangents about any one candidate. But regardless of anyone's feelings about the current president, he campaigned and continues to market himself as a disruptor. What could be more disruptive than federally legalizing cannabis? And I think, I'm speaking for myself here, but I think there are others, in addition to me, that would love to see some disruption of a positive note, the kind that I think would come from federally legalizing cannabis, ending this foolish prohibition. That's something I think a lot of people would be happy to see. But either way, there's some pleasant stuff there on the horizon, mostly some good news to talk about this week. A lot of expansion, a lot of talk of the future, and it still looks bright regardless of what 2024 kind of brought for a lot of the economy, but certainly the cannabis industry. I think this is some welcome news, and I hope that cheered you up the way it did for me. But if it didn't, I hope this week's haiku will get you there. So whatever you've got to ingest, if it's a beverage, crack it open. If you've got an edible, bite into that thing, or light up whichever bowl or bong or joint you got to spark, or vape cart, especially if it's one of these well-designed from Corner Boys here. Go ahead and lay it on the lips, and let's all enjoy this week's haiku together, courtesy of my friend Reg Kiefer. The mic is yours, Reg.
Welcome back. Welcome back, bro. Break was just a blink. Chaos swirls. The grind resumes. Floating, riding high. Whoa. That was this week's haiku, bro.
Yes, it was, Reg. Thank you for reading that, as always. And thank you, listener, for putting up with that, as well as the rest of this program. I really appreciate you listening to the Cannabis Man podcast. I hope you enjoyed the news and perspective that I provided, that new information, as well as my talk with Tim Cullen of Colorado Harvest Company. Check out their website if you're in or you're traveling to Colorado in the near future. Definitely check them out. That one store, both of them, the one on the Green Mile as well as their Aurora spot, both seem like they're really worth stopping by. I can't wait to do that myself. I hope to get to try some of their stuff soon. Also, keep an eye out for Emerald Gardens here in Illinois. Check out Corner Boys if you haven't. Definitely this vape. I really want to hear if you've tried this or you do try it. Tell me what you think. You can text the show. There's a link in the description notes that says Text Cannabis Man. Click that and you can leave a message and I will get it. If you try these things, tell me what you think. But as I said, I shared pictures on the show socials. Just the design alone. I've got this thing on me, in my pocket, on my person, like all the time because it's so light and the shape is just easily, as I said, kind of hideable. You can just put it in the whatever pocket, even if it's on your shirt or whatever. It's just great stuff. So, Yep, still groovy. Gotta love that. Be sure to leave a rating or review and follow the show on social media. If you have any guests you think I should talk with, any products that you think I should try, you can feel free to text, send an email, send a message on the socials. Any of those is just fine. I will get your message eventually. Really love it when you engage with the show, and I want to thank you again for driving this show to the heights that it has reached. 87 countries around the world is nothing to sneeze at. I am so grateful, and I'm humbled by that. So thank you for listening wherever you are, whatever your position on cannabis is, it's fine by me, and I'm happy to be talking with you on the Cannabis Man podcast. And we'll talk next week. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Goodson.